quite a little while since I looked at any jazz piano, so what I'm going to do today is kind of make a little overview tutorial in which we look at a broad range of the skills involved. I want to do this because a lot of people, including quite a lot of quite good pianists who don't play jazz, look at the process of jazz piano and think it's magic. They think it's rocket science, they think it's incredible, and really it's not. Okay, it's not easy, it takes a lot of practice, but the basic ideas are really not complicated at all. So what I'm going to do is, I've written this little 16-bar chord progression. I'm going to improvise on that a couple of times through, and then we're going to lift the lid, if you like, look under the bonnet, look under the hood, into the engine space, and try and figure out what is making this improvisation stick together, what the component parts are, how they work together. Okay, and then, you know, if you guys seem to like this sort of thing, what I'll do then is make 2 or 3 more videos digging into some of the particular skills in a little bit more detail. Okay, some of it's stuff I've talked about in the past, but you know, you'll see that when we come to it. Okay, enough waffling. Let me play through this chord progression a couple of times, just improvising in a fairly light jazzy style. Okay, so there we go. I didn't do anything too wildly extravagant, and it's, as I said, a fairly straightforward chord sequence. But that's a little bit of jazz piano. Let's now wheel back and look at the process I go through to turn this chord sequence, which I'll go through in a second, into something like that. Okay. First of all, let's just look at the chords. We've got 16 bars. I should say that I'm kind of assuming that when I name individual chords and when I talk about some basic kind of music theory concepts here, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have time to, you know, teach you all individual chords in detail here, so if all this stuff sounds like, you know, it's mysterious to you, check back in my timeline. In particular, check out my videos on really basic harmony and on chords, because I go through all this stuff there in quite a lot of detail. But okay, we've got 16 bars, fairly straightforward chords. I'll just play you the 16 bars, but just focusing on the basic chords. Okay? And it goes like this. F, 3, 4, D7, 2, 3, 4, G minor 7, C7, so that's 4 bars, F, D minor 7, B flat 6, C7, so that takes us to 8 bars, F, F7, 3, 4, B flat minor, that's 12 bars, and then F, D7, G minor 7, C7, F, 2 bars of F, which gives me space for a turnaround. In bars 9 and 10, you'll notice I was putting in 2 chords to the bar. So in, no, not 9 and 10, sorry, in 13 and 14, okay? F, D7, G minor 7, C7 to F. Okay. What I'll do is I'll put those chords online somewhere and include a link, so you know, so you don't have to kind of just memorise them here. Jot them down, and those are the basic chords we're working from. Now, the process of turning that chord progression into an improvisation, a jazz improvisation, starts with those chords, because the first thing we're doing is extending and in some cases substituting those chords. Okay, those are two concepts you'll come across an awful lot in jazz: extension and substitution. So let me give you an example. F is a chord that crops up quite a lot in that sequence, but when I was improvising you probably actually never saw me play a kind of bare, unadorned F chord. Okay, most of the time I was taking the basic F chord and extending it. Yeah, most commonly into F major 7, which you'll have seen a lot in the left hand, just played as what we call a shell chord. Okay, down here. But also it came in various other forms, so we got some fairly exotic things. I think at one point I played that, which is F11, okay, maybe even with an added sixth in there, I can't quite remember, and I think maybe at one point I played F6 with an added 9. Okay, so taking the basic F chords and building them into jazzier sounding chords. Okay, now the way you figure out those chords is kind of a learning process, and you partially do it by ear and you partially do it by copying other people or learning from people like me. But the first thing you do is work out which chords sound cool as extensions of your basic chords, because usually when you get a chord sequence that you need to turn into a jazz improvisation, usually it would just list the basic chords like F. Not always, sometimes they'll be written out in sort of more imaginative ways. But your first job is to figure out how to extend those chords into something that sounds, more jazzy. Okay, that's chord extension. The other thing I was doing was a little bit of chord substitution, which is more dramatic than chord extension. It's where you take a particular chord and completely replace it with a different chord. Okay, that most commonly happens on dominant type chords. Okay, so I'm assuming you know what I mean when I use the word dominant there. So the dominant chord in F major is C or C7. So when I'm coming across that C7 chord, usually I'm substituting it with something completely different, simply because the simple C7 to F, it just sounds, it's a bit pat, it's a bit cheesy, it's a bit too simple for jazz. Yeah. So there are various substitutions. A very common substitution is to, in this key, is to play Gm7 with a C in the bass. Yeah. Or the more famous one, the typically jazz one, is the famous tritone substitution, where instead of playing C7 to F, we play G flat 7 with a C in the bass, okay, up to F. Yeah, this is all stuff that I've covered before. I'll include some little links in screen here, so you can go off to those tutorials I've made in the past. But that's the first part of coming up with a jazz improvisation. Okay, we have our chord sequence, and we take the chords and we either extend them or substitute them. Okay, partially we'll do that on the fly, but usually, and this is the case with a lot of improvisation, although you don't play any improvisation the same way twice through, that's not part of the point. Usually you do a certain amount of preparation, so you have various kind of tricks up your sleeve ready to play. Okay, so that's the first part of it, coming up with a richer chord sequence. Then we have to think about our left hand. Yeah, the job of the left hand is to make that chord progression clear to the listener, and that's its primary job. Okay, so most of what I'm doing in the left hand is playing shapes that identify those chords. A really common way of doing that is to play a shell chord. Say the chord we want to play is F major 7. Okay, so in the left hand I'll play something like that. I've talked about shell chords before, I'll include a link to the tutorial. The reason we play those chords as shells is, well, first of all, that gives us the basic identity of an F major 7 chord. But because we're a long way down the piano with lots of really chunky overtones, we don't want to play a full block chord because it sounds really muddy. Okay, so instead we play the shell chord. If we get up here, we can more comfortably play the full block chord. So primarily what's going on in the left is that I'm playing those shapes that identify the chord sequence. The left might not be the be-all and end-all of the chord progression. So for example, when we're playing that F11 chord, it needs the right hand to get involved to play all the notes, but the left hand is doing the hard work of the harmony. Yeah. When you start out playing jazz piano, the best way to, rather than putting too much movement into your left hand, is just to play simple chords, one per bar, or however many you need per bar if it's a 2-chord bar, and just let your right hand do the rest. What I was doing, however, was using my left hand also to suggest a sense of tempo and rhythm, okay, to suggest a sense of movement. Okay, it does that in conjunction with the right hand. A really easy trap to fall into, and I fell into this, you know, when I was learning with jazz piano, is to assume that the left hand has to create rhythm if you don't have a drum kit and a bass player behind you. So it has to do stupid things like this. Yeah, simply because there's no one else providing movement. And you really don't have to do that. I mean, you can do walking basses and stuff. Okay, but oftentimes, in fact probably most of the time, you can just kind of hint at movement using your left hand, using those sort of stabby motions, and your listener's brain will kind of fill in the rest. Okay, so 3 basic concepts so far. First of all, we're extending and substituting our chords. Secondly, we're using our left hand to create a kind of harmonic anchor, but also a slight sense of movement. In the right hand, we're doing the melodic improvisation. Now, this is just a chord sequence, it's not a full song. If it was a full song, you would have the melody to play with, but I'm just improvising from scratch. Okay? What I'm doing in the right hand is improvising around scales, fundamentally. Okay? And F major scale crops up quite a lot. It's the kind of the most basic scale we can play there. But the ones I'm using most commonly are F major pentatonic, okay, A minor pentatonic, although I'm not sure I used it very much in that kind of that run through, but it sounds really cool. Okay, and also F blues, which is kind of controversial what blues scales are and aren't, but that's my blues scale. Okay, or you can play a really simple blues scale, something like that. Okay, you can also, I also played stuff that began to look like various modes. Maybe in a couple of places you could have said, "Oh, that's Dorian mode," but just park modes for now. But people often get bogged down talking about mode or jazz, and you can play an awful lot of jazz without knowing very much about how modes work at all, actually. Okay, so for now, let's just focus on what I was doing with F major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic, and the blues scales. Again, these are all scales that I've made videos about in the past. Basically, the beauty of those scales, using a chord sequence like this, is you can play pretty much any note from those scales over any chord in that sequence, and because it's jazz, it will sound fine. So it doesn't matter if you're playing D7 and you hit an F. Okay, that's part of the cool jazzy sound. In fact, that builds a really common jazz chord, which is a 7th with a sharp 9. It's D7 sharp 9. Okay, really, really key component of jazz. Okay, but you can play any of those scales over any of the chords in the left. Okay, and occasionally you'll be playing 2 notes or 3 notes or chords at a time, especially when you want to play those rich chords. But by and large, I'm just mucking about, improvising little tunes. Okay. I wasn't playing the actual chord sequence there. Hold on, let's start again. Okay. People think improvisation is magic, and it's really not. It's just a case of getting used to it. And again, I've talked about how to start right-hand improvisation in the past, and the best way to do it, if I make some follow-ups to this video, I'll go over it again, but the best way to do it is just to start with one note. If you've got a pentatonic scale of F, just play the note F over chords in the left hand. And then use two notes. And just build up until you're playing, you know, you're improvising over the whole scale. Okay? We'll come on to that in a second. Okay, so that's our third basic concept. Or is it our fourth basic concept? Anyway, that's our next basic concept. We're using scales as the basis of our right hand improvisation over the left. Next basic concept, which might be the fourth or fifth, I've kind of lost count, is that we kind of make the hands work together and play off each other, and this is the most difficult part. With a little bit of practice, it's fairly easy to play a left hand, it's fairly easy to play the right hand. Okay, it's putting them together where it gets difficult. Okay. Okay. The way most people get around it is to start off by focusing on the right and making the left very simple. One way of doing it, though it has its dangers, is to memorise the left hand part. That's great because it allows you to practice your right over a left hand that you can just play automatically, but it does mean you tend to get stuck in ruts. Okay, it's a good thing to play different left hands most of the time. Getting the two hands to work together is the most challenging part. Another really common way of doing it, and I do this all the time, is to kind of, if you're a classically trained pianist, to use classical music to help you. Okay, especially kind of Baroque music, which is, and you know, the reason you play a lot of Baroque music when you're just learning to play the piano, when you're, you know, just your first 2 or 3 years, is that it forces your two hands to work together. Okay, so playing a lot of Bach. Okay, forces your hands to work together and forces you to sort out fingering as well. Okay, what I often do if I'm working on a particular improvisation is that I'll practice the improvisation, then I'll practice 5 minutes of something like Bach. Okay, that was Suite No. 1 in D minor from the French Suites. Then go back to the improvisation, then play the Bach, then the improvisation, and the two kind of feed it off each other. Okay, it's like cross training. If you're playing a sport, you know, if you're you know, a champion kayak racer or something, you will spend some of your training time on a bike. Okay, cross training, same principle. So there we go. I sense I'm getting kind of blethery and waffly now, and this is probably going to turn into quite a long video. So I'll stop there. But those are our basic concepts. We have our chord progression jotted down on a scratty old piece of paper. First of all, we take those chords and extend them and substitute them. Okay. Then we think about a left hand which defines the harmony and also creates a slight sense of rhythm. Okay, but doesn't get too repetitive and isn't the same every time. Then over the top we create an improvisation based on scales, particularly pentatonic and blues scales, and then we stick the whole thing together. Now that sounds totally simple, and actually obviously it's quite hard to do in practice and it will take you a long time, but that's kind of what's going on under the bonnet. Yeah. If this video goes down well, I'll make a few more digging into some of those concepts in more detail, and obviously if you haven't seen some of my previous videos, I've included links to those as annotations here. Okay, so hopefully that has been of some use in kind of getting you inside the head of an improvising pianist. Yeah. Any questions, comments, give me a shout, put them in the comment thread. I do try to get back to people reasonably quickly if I can, though sometimes I do get a lot of questions. If you are really just starting out on the basics, you might be interested in my book, which conveniently I haven't left lying on the piano stand. So let me see if I can find a copy. Yeah, my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you, which doesn't go into loads of detail about jazz, but does talk about getting started with improvisation in the context of blues, actually, improvising 12-bar blues. And also, the most important thing if you're just starting out, goes through all the chords and how basic harmony works, and contains a bunch of chord charts in the back. Okay, so that's £9.95 for the digital edition, that's pounds, and £14.95 for the print edition. So there we go. Okay, hopefully that was useful, maybe a little bit rambly, hope not. But as I say, if that was useful, I will probably make 2 or 3 more videos based on that kind of chord progression and really kind of dig down into how we do what we do when we're playing jazz on the piano.